Well, hello, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to another Self Publishing Insiders from Draft to Digital. And we're glad to have you here, wherever you're tuning in on Facebook, YouTube, or anywhere else. If you're somewhere else, please let us know how you're doing that because it seems like magic to us. But I'm happy to be chatting with someone we've only ever interacted online, mostly via Twitter. Karl Drinkwater, he's an author, he is an influencer in his own right, is heavily involved in the indie author community. Welcome, Karl, to Self Publishing Insiders, sir.
Thank you very much. I'm very pleased to be here.
Wait a minute, you're British. You didn't tell me
Yes.
you were British.
Oh, well. Yes, and my accent changes as well. It depends on the context because I've lived in Wales for many years and learned Welsh. So there'd be times when I was working on an inquiry desk and I'd have a very Welsh accent when I was dealing with people. That was the most terrible accent ever. Been in Scotland for a few years, grew up in Manchester. So yeah, my accent can change a lot. It's not always obvious where I'm from.
It'll just drift from now to the end of the
broadcast. Exactly.
So yeah, we were talking beforehand. You live in a part of the world where everyone that lives in my part of the world wants to go and wants to visit.
Scotland.
So Scotland, but then I live in Texas. Everybody wants to come here too. They don't want to admit it, but they want to come here too.
Well, so it looks lovely. You've got sunshine. We don't always get sunshine up here.
Yeah, sunshine. We got plenty of sunshine. And it comes with plenty of humidity and heat.
Yeah.
So we got someone chiming in from Houston, Texas. It's more or less my hometown. Hello, Charles.
Mm-hmm.
So now you sent a whole list of interesting topics we can delve into, but the one I really want to focus on right off, and the one I think is going to provide a lot of insight for people watching, is just how you came to become an independent author in your own right. So what is your origin story, Karl?
Well, I'm one of those people. I think you get some authors that come to it later on, and sometimes they worry about that and think, oh no, I've left it too late to become a top-selling crime author or whatever. I never think that is the case. I think it's always possible to come to anything at any time of your life and make a success of it. But I'm one of the people who, when I was 5, when I was 6, I was already writing stories, always interested in storytelling. And it's probably why when I was in my teenage years, I was obsessed with Dungeons and Dragons and role-playing games and the way that you would create stories that way, often on the spot, on the fly. So I carried on writing for, all through my teenage years. And I'd already decided that it was the thing I always wanted to do. But at the same time, I realized, I think I'm quite realistic. And I realized that overnight successes don't happen to many people. Often the people that are successful, it just requires, in any sphere, it requires years and years of practice, training, gradual improvement, and so on. So I thought, I'm not going to bet the farm on becoming Stephen King in 2 years or anything like that. So I threw myself into a separate career. I'd always loved books. I'd been even when I was at college, I worked in public libraries at the weekends. And from there, I went on after my degree. I did a master's degree in information science and librarianship. So I developed a career as a full-time academic librarian, teaching students about information literacy, which is how to find and use and evaluate information, helping staff with research. And these are all things that have actually proved to be very useful to me as an author, because as you know, whenever we don't know something, we make it up to begin with, right? But we have to check our facts at some point, whether it be to do with light speed or whether this poison will kill somebody and be undetectable, right? That kind of thing. So I had this whole career of teaching librarians, teaching students and so on. And I live a very frugal lifestyle. I don't have a car. I've never had a car. I don't have children. I don't go on holidays abroad. I cook my own food. And it means that I didn't have to work extremely hard to be actually saving up money, always with the plan that I would use that to sustain myself when it came to making the move to being a writer. So over the years, I was lucky enough to be able to cut down my hours in full-time employment. And instead of it being an all or nothing thing, which is actually a very scary move for a lot of people, for obvious reasons, everyone's got financial commitments, I was able to kind of slowly reduce my hours in work and spend more time writing and still keep saving money. And that carried on for a while. I started to have a bit of success. I had good feedback on the books that I'd written. I went back and polished them and made them even better, and then got even better feedback. Because, as you know, at the start of it, it's often a process of feeling your way around, trying things out, listening to experts and working out which bits of advice they give are useful bits of advice for you to take and apply. So you might experiment with all sorts of things there. And then eventually I reached a point where I felt I was ready to give up the other work and go full-time into writing, hopefully survive on the savings I had.
Right.
And it coincided with a slightly darker period of my life. I'd suffered from depression for a bit, and it actually helped me because I think it pushed me to that point where I needed to make a decision and commit myself. And I decided at that point, yes, I will give it everything, the writing. And if it doesn't work, I'll set up Drinkies decorating or get a job in the local pub or something like that.
Yeah.
Plan B. Always have a plan B.
Yeah, plan B. And those are admirable careers. But it's interesting. So do you consider the writing, was that like part of maybe therapy for you, or how did that work for you?
You are absolutely right about that. I think one of the things that always appealed to me about writing, I consider it as a whole of the storytelling is the bit I'm interested in. The idea, because it's something humans have done obviously for thousands of years, the idea that we want to communicate with other humans, we want to perhaps explore ideas, but also communicate our kind of feel our way around a topic by telling a story, whether it is by the campfire, telling ghost stories and helping each other to get used to the darkness and scary things, or whether we want to communicate something else. And it was always a form of escapism for me. I think I remember as a child when maybe there was a problem in the house, I would grab a book, I would run out of the house, I would climb a weeping willow tree at the bottom of the garden with this book of ghost stories, go to the top and sit there reading the ghost stories. And I would completely forget that I was sat in a tree, and I would completely forget that there was a problem in the house and there might have been arguments. All I knew was the world that had been put onto the page by that author. And I think that's the kind of reason that it originally became part of my DNA, that I wanted to be able to create worlds and stories that could immerse someone else. So even though the original thing might have been escapism, I think reading other people's work, but also creating things yourself, does help to escape for a while from the real world. I mean, there's so many beautiful and great things in the real world. We don't want to completely withdraw from it. But at the same time, sometimes things pile up and life becomes hard. And you need to take a step back as a form of self-care. And I think stories, for me, yeah, you're probably right that it has helped with things like depression and other difficult times, because, yeah, it's the escapism angle, I think. Same as someone else might watch a film or a TV series and binge on that.
Exactly. Yeah, I know that when I don't do the writing, my wife will attest to this. When I don't do the writing, I'm a very cranky person. So I have to write every day to stay on the even. That's my drug of choice. So where was that friction point for you when you decided that it was time to leave the library job? And I mean, it sounds like you kind of gradually phased out. So like maybe you got down to like an hour a week and then suddenly just didn't show. Is that how that worked, or did you?
It was a plan. I think by the end, I was working just under half time. So I'd gone from working, 37 hours a week is sort of average in the UK. That's, 9 to 5:30 every day. I got down to just below half hours, and I'd shifted jobs around a bit as well. I'd been doing maternity cover with somebody else. I'm working for another organization temporarily. And I love my work. This is the interesting thing. It's never that I hated my other job. It was just that I needed to focus more completely on the writing. And a few things coincided, I think, which led me down a darker path. Usually, depression is something that when people have it, they learn to deal with it. With any illness, physical or mental, you develop coping mechanisms, and that could be, writing for a number of hours a day. It could be meditation or physical exercise, something like that. So you tend to also be aware of when you're heading towards maybe a darker patch. There's warning signs that appear with anything like that. And I think for me, a few things coincided, which were just enough to tip me over the edge. And normally I think I'm a fairly positive person and quite a sociable person. And my personality just reversed. I couldn't cope with anything at that point. It was quite a bad period. But, things turn around and now I'm living the dream.
Living the dream. That's all anyone can ask for. Actually, we can ask for a lot, but living the dream is a pretty remarkable accomplishment, actually. So
yeah, not every day. Most days.
Right. What's a typical day? What does the dream look like for Karl Drinkwater?
The dream for me, okay. One of the things, I think exercise and health are very important. If you're a writer, you sit on your arse a lot, usually, unless you're one of the authors who, for example, walks around recording using Dragon Dictate or something like that. You normally go spend a lot of time sat down.
Right.
It's never worked for me really either.
It's never worked for me.
So my typical day, I try and incorporate some exercise. And what I like to do is the first thing I do when I get up, my eyes haven't opened yet. I've not even had my first cup of tea, which is vital for me getting my brain in gear. But I go out for a run. I live in a beautiful area, just opposite my house. Look out my window here and I can see the river. There's fields across from there. And if I go down my road, I can do this. It's part of what's called the Burns Loop, named after Robert Burns, the Scottish poet. I can do part of the Burns Loop with the river to my side, swans, all beautiful wildlife. It's not a long run because I'm not a great runner. I'm not a long distance runner, but sort of that 1.5 miles, 2 miles or something, and then get back. And that's a really good start because then my body's worked and I'm ready to do some mental work. So have a cup of tea, catch up on social media, the kind of things that will distract you if you don't do them in specified time slots. And then I'll get on with my next project. So unlike you, I don't write every day, but I do work on my books every day. So if I'm writing, then basically I will be stood there, I'll be working on my laptop and I'll get words down. It's, a vital part of it. But at other stages in the project, I might be spending all the time editing or dealing with what my editors have said or working on the ideas for the next book or doing research or something like that. But generally, I'll try and fill the rest of my day with the work on my current project and looking forward a little bit more at what my next project is going to be, so that there's always 2 or 3 at different stages of production.
You actually made a few points about editors and editing in text-based conversations we had prior to this. So what is how do you see editing? Like, what's the importance of it? Everyone knows the importance of it. That's a dumb question. To you, how does editing work?
It's vital because it's certainly more vital at the start of your career. What happens is the more writing you do and the more you learn, the better you get at self-editing. That's a given. But even though I've edited books for other authors and I've written articles about editing and so on, there's something about the fact that you're so close to your own work which makes it hard to see it with fresh eyes. Right. And even when you create something that, it could be really good, sometimes what an editor does that's really good, I think, they give you suggestions. They don't tell you what to do, but they give you suggestions. And hopefully the best editors, they also explain why they think this would improve the work. And you don't take all those ideas. You pick the ones that won't change your voice too much, but the ones where you can see that, it will be an improvement. So with one of my books, I'd written it. I had great feedback from my beta readers. I'd had good feedback from an editor. And a fellow author, an American author who I've worked with a few times and I've known for many years and I respect, he actually read through that early draft. And he came back with just one suggestion there was something that was mentioned in the book and we didn't see it in detail. It was just mentioned as an aside. And he said, you know what, you're missing a trick here, Karl. That is one of perhaps the most interesting things that are mentioned in the story, you've got to build that in. So, and he was absolutely right. So I went away, I deleted 10,000 words, I deleted a whole scene that wasn't as important, and I wrote this new section based on his idea. He didn't tell me what to write, he just said, you need to somehow show this. And when I've had feedback from reviews and so on, you read the reviews, often people's favorite sections of the book were that one. And it shows that if he hadn't made that suggestion to me, I would have gone ahead, it would have still been a good book, but somebody else with fresh eyes saw a gap or an improvement that could be made, and it just clicks with you and you think, yeah, they're absolutely right. You know, I do need to cut this scene, I do need to write this, I do need to do this thing with characterization or restructure. And I think that's what makes the real value. And of course, over time, there are fewer and fewer suggestions people make that you need because they become internalized in you. So if one of my editors and proofreaders has told me off again and again for, I don't know, some punctuation error, or there's an American author who corrects me for long ass paragraphs. Karl, look at these long ass paragraphs. Sorry, that's a terrible accent. I don't do accent.
That's pretty good.
But she tells me off for that. So now when I write long ass paragraphs, I look at them and decide, does it justify itself, or do I need to break that up? So you do internalize all this feedback that you get from editors over time until you don't need so much anymore. But certainly at the start, not getting that feedback from editors, beta readers, your family when you're starting out, just other people with other views, you're missing out, I think.
Yeah. You know, most of us see writing as a very solitary act. It seems to me your perspective is that it's more collaborative then.
It's collaborative at the point of the rewrite. I always think first drafts, sometimes even the ideas when you're maybe plotting something out, even the ideas I don't tend to discuss with anyone else, because if I want feedback from someone, I want them to see it fresh and perhaps to, you know, be surprised at the points where I want them to be surprised. And if that doesn't work, they can tell me. Whereas if they've been told too much in advance, you know, I can't test whether it's working as a whole. So my first draft, I don't want feedback from anyone. I don't let anybody see it. I don't discuss what I'm writing. I'll discuss that I'm writing, you know, a certain book, but I won't discuss any plot elements or characters or anything like that. Only after I've got that first draft, which is the one where I think it's so important to get words down, a habit that I developed from NaNoWriMo, National Novel Writing Month. That was the first time where I ever got into this habit of I must write this many thousand words a day. And if I don't, I've got to write the extra ones tomorrow as a kind of punishment. And so that first draft.
You look back and make sure you get those words.
Yeah, you've got to get them down, because otherwise you've got nothing to edit, you've got nothing to publish, you've got nothing to improve on.
Right. So are you a planner or a plotter or a pantser? He'll get it right when he says it the second time. A plotter or a pantser?
I'm mostly a plotter. If I'm doing a short story, I think it's fine to for me to maybe just have an idea and just write it out and see where it goes. A short story isn't necessarily a lot of commitment. So if you get stuck in it, you can rewrite it. If you write the whole thing and it's not worked, you can delete it. It's not too bad to throw away, you know, 10,000 words or 5,000. But a novel is such a big time commitment. And also not just the writing of it, but the rewriting, the restructuring, the editing, that for me personally, I couldn't just write it. But at the same time, I don't want to plot every single minor transaction and interaction and point, because that would take away the fun of writing it and the spontaneity. So what I tend to do is kind of a bit in the middle. I will plot lots of points where I really want to have a scene. I really want to have this reversal. I'll have an idea of escalating conflict and arcs and all the rest of it. But I won't put every detail in. And then when I come to write it, I might know that I'm starting from this point and maybe at the end of it, this is going to happen. But then I let the characters that I've developed sort of interact and basically take it in sometimes a different direction, or to get to the outcome that I want, but in a way that feels fresh to me. So it's a bit of both. I'm much more on the plot side because I think it's so important when you are a professional author, or whether you're a professional businessman or whatever. you always need to know where you're going and to be able to apportion your time correctly and manage things. But at the same time, you don't want to make writing stale. It's really important that it feels fresh to the author. And that sense of fun and excitement then comes through, hopefully, to the reader.
Yeah.
That's the idea.
Yeah. Before I ask this next question, I want to remind everybody that if you've got a question, feel free to pop it in the comments, no matter where you are, Facebook or YouTube, and we're going to get to questions live at the end of the broadcast, the last 15 minutes. So, which is coming up, and we'll start taking questions about 10 minutes from now. So you've got time.
Yep.
So what are some of the sort of tools of the trade for you? And I mean, what you write in any special software, or do you use anything for plotting or anything like that?
When it comes to the first draft, I'm quite particular. I've already mentioned the importance of exercise and so on. And one of my issues is that I'm sat down a lot. When I used to work in the library, I had read about people working standing up. So although I worked in a massive open plan office with, I think there was about 100 people probably in there, I collected all these plastic monitor stands and stacked them up, stuck my computer on top of that. And in the middle of these 100 people sat down, I started working standing up. And everyone would look up and see me and go, oh, there's that weirdo, you know, he stood up there. But it worked really well. I felt more productive. When people approached me, it was more sociable for them to be stood next to me talking rather than one person looking up at another one. So I was more approachable. And I actually incorporate that into my writing now, so that although I have a computer over there, which is my main, you know, powerhouse for all my things, when I do a first draft, I've got a very, very old laptop. It's Windows XP. It's not connected to the internet at all, so there's no distractions. I gave it the ironic name of Word Cruncher Turbo, just to make it feel a bit better, because it's a bit noisy and slow. And the only piece of software that I've installed on it is what's called a distraction-free writing tool. There's a number of them, I think Write Monkey and Darkroom and things like that. And they're basically plain text editors. So you can't even do italics on them. There are no menus. They just fill the screen. And I have it set up so it's a black background and then glowing green or orange text, like a very old-fashioned word processor, as I'd imagine Stephen King writing on in the 80s or something like that. And I have all the typewriter sounds, the ting, 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 and ching when I get to the end of a line. And I use that for my first draft so that I can't do anything except stand there and write. And I find that when you're writing, you want to somehow fall through the page so that instead of thinking, oh, that's another 10 words written, how long did that take? And being focused on the mechanism, you actually want to fall into the story. It goes back to this escapism thing I was talking about at the start. You want to fall into the stories that you're living it and you are living the characters, and you don't realize that you've just written 1,000 words. The best thing that can happen, I think, is that you stop and wipe your brow and have a bit of coffee and realize you've written 3,000 words and you only had to write 1,000 that day, perhaps, because you've been so caught up in it. I think distraction-free is the way to go for that first draft. And then after that, I go onto my main computer, and that's when I start using various bits of software and tools like Pro Writing Aid, Edit Minion, Hemingway app. I do use those kind of things for consistency. I also have a piece of software which turns a document into an MP3 file.
Oh.
And I paid for a professional voice, and it's a Scottish voice, a female Scottish voice, so that the MP3 file is my book read out by a Scottish woman. Okay. And I did this before I ever moved to Scotland. It's just coincidence that I now live here, because I find that if you read a book yourself, you hear it in your own voice, and it doesn't make it fresh to your ears. As soon as I hear it in a Scottish accent, immediately repetition stands out. If there's clunky phrasing, it stands out. It feels like someone else is telling me a story, and I can't turn off the editorial mode. So I can walk in a circle, getting some exercise, and I can be writing, oh, that's clunky. Oh, 10 words, 5 would have done that. Repetition. Oh, that sound has been used too many times on the page. And hearing it read to me, although it's a time-consuming thing. So, for example, a novel of 120,000 words, you might be talking about a 6-hour MP3. I'll spend a week listening to it and making notes, and never have I done that and not come up with at least 100 improvements to the sound of it. And if you go into audiobooks, I think it's even more important to have a book which sounds nice when it's read out. You've got to make it a bit easier for your narrator. And clunky things that don't show up on the page will show up when you hear them read. So it's better to fix them before they go to a narrator, and you go to all the trouble of creating the audiobook than to listen to the audiobook afterwards and go, oh, why didn't I, use synonyms for that word, that kind of thing.
Right. Yeah. I'm very conscious of word repetition, and I'll catch things on edit that I clearly latch onto a word.
Yeah.
And I'll use that word 6 or 7 times on a page if I'm not monitoring myself.
We all do.
So let's shift gears slightly because you have been active in the indie author community. What are some of the ways in which you are sort of helping other people get into this work?
Well, basically, I think this is where I bring part of my librarianship background in, because I was always professionally involved with that, and I would give talks at conferences and be part of networks and work with other librarians. So when I went full-time as an author, I was very interested in joining organizations that support authors. So one of the first ones I joined was the Alliance of Independent Authors, and I've worked with them both in the fora. I give advice, I receive it as well, because it's always two-way. I've written articles for their website on things like working with editors or using software to help you with editing your own work. I've joined the British Science Fiction Association because I also write science fiction. And although I've not been a member of the BSFA for long, I've written an article for their next issue of one of their magazines. They have one magazine called Focus, which is aimed at helping authors to write science fiction. So I've written an article for the next issue on writing artificial intelligence characters and making them convincing, and how you could perhaps tie them into the plot, and what kind of ideas you can explore through the medium of an artificial intelligence character. So that's got to be in the next issue of Focus. I'm also a member of the Horror Writers Association. So with them, I've been involved in various ways. But for example, one year, one of the biggest awards for horror writers is the Bram Stoker Awards. And although I've never won a Bram Stoker Award, I was on one of the preliminary ballots once for one of my books. So to kind of pay it back, I decided to chair one of the panels one year for the Bram Stoker. So I chaired Navila's. And it was a large time commitment, because it meant a whole year of reading all the submissions to that category, working with the other judges on trying to shortlist out of hundreds and hundreds of books which ones we thought were the most useful. And it was a really useful thing, even though it was hard work, and it meant I couldn't read for pleasure for the whole year. I only had to read things that were coming in as part of that. It was a really useful thing because it meant that I was seeing almost everything that had been published in that genre for that year. And you also get really good at being able to develop an impression of something from even just the first few pages. Often I would find that my instincts about how good the writing would be and how the plot would go were generally fulfilled from the predictions I made on the starting, not just the paragraph, because the first paragraph, that'd be too much, but the first few pages would give me a lot of information. And then you can take that away with you. And when you do your own writing, it helps you to focus on that initial impression, basically. We know how short people's attention spans are and how important it is to have a good first line, a good look inside on Amazon, a good blurb, a good cover that tells people the genre and the audience and so on for that. And I think reading a lot of work by other people in the area that you write in is a huge benefit for improving your own writing.
Yeah. So, okay, in addition to tips like that, I think everybody could use tips on how to write a better opening line and how to get attention on Amazon. Do you have any other strategies authors could use for that?
I'm not so great on marketing in that I'm one of those people, when it comes to targeting on Amazon and so on, I'm much more focused on quality writing and slow organic growth based on a good reputation than anything that tries to accelerate that. I would much rather spend a lot of time on my book and make it as good as possible than spend a big chunk of that time, for example, on discounted promos. And although I use all those techniques as well, I'm not as interested. I don't do a lot of advertising, for example. I do some, and I use BookBorb and so on, and featured deals are a great way of promoting your work. But you always have to be wary, because the problem with any advice is that all advice is conditional. You might say that it's great to do a certain thing, like have a cliffhanger ending. But of course, if everybody does it, it loses its impact, and then it becomes predictable. And then the person who doesn't do that becomes more interesting. So it's always important to be aware of what other authors are doing and what works for them and what doesn't. But you have to be very selective about not, I think the phrase jumping on a bandwagon's maybe too harsh,
right?
But
right.
Following too closely what other people do, because then you can feel a bit samey and it won't be your own voice. And it's your own voice if you're having a long-term career in something like this. It's your own voice that basically is going to be your selling point, your USP, I think. Rather than the fact that you wrote a book that's a bit like this book that was out last year and was successful, The Martian or Harry Potter or whatever.
Always trailing someone else's success, right? Well, we're at the final 15 minutes, so we're going to go ahead and open things up for Q&A here, and we've got some questions in the comments.
Right.
First up, Charles Harvey asks, how do you market yourself as a multi-genre author? It's a puzzle to me. That puzzles a lot of authors, man. So how do you do it?
Well, it's one of those things you're advised generally not to do, to be a multi-genre author. And only yesterday I was talking with another author about the idea of collaborating. And just like me, they are also a multi-genre author, but they've used pen names for each of their different genres, which I think is an approach that many authors take, because you don't want to confuse things like your also boughts and recommendation algorithms by someone who follows one of your genres and has no interest in the others being recommended those books. You don't want that. But at the same time, there's a lot of crossover. If there's a lot of crossover in the genres that you write, then I think it can work to a degree. And this is what I find, because, for example, I'm always interested in not so much the genre, but telling a good story, regardless of genre. And sometimes a particular genre will lend itself to being a better way to explore that story. So, for example, if you're exploring something like the nature of humanity and intelligence, science fiction works quite well for that.
Right.
So, but if you focus on characters and things like that, and your writing style is good, then sometimes, and luckily this does happen, you will find that people get into you from one of the genres, but they actually become interested in the others as well. And that can be a benefit, because some things become popular for a while, they lose popularity again. Instead of putting all your eggs in one basket, you actually almost have a plan B and a plan C if one of them doesn't work out. And I think that can be an advantage, but certainly you won't grow as quickly. It'll be much more organic if you write in multiple genres with the same name rather than using pseudonyms.
That's a question that comes up a lot. Whether or not to use pen names. So I assume your answer then is don't.
When I was young, I've already mentioned that I always wrote. I would say to people at school, one day my books will be on the bookshelves. You'll see my name. And partly I think because I promised that to so many people, I felt, I've got to stick to this name.
Gotta do it.
People have taken the mickey out of my name for so many decades. Karl Drinkwater. People would, you wouldn't believe the nicknames that I had. So I almost wanted to buck the trend and prove that I could succeed with a stupid name like Karl Drinkwater. When I was a kid, I wanted to rename myself as James Bond. I'm glad I never did that. But when I was about 10, I did want to look into those options. So, I did consider pen names. And I even considered you've got Ian Banks and Ian M. Banks as one way of I was going to be Karl K. Drinkwater for one genre, Karl D. Drinkwater for dark fiction, Karl S. Drinkwater for science fiction. I'm glad I just kept it simple. because it means I only have to have one website and one Twitter account and one Facebook account and one Instagram account and so on.
Much easier to track everything.
Oh,
I
administration.
went through the entire same thing. I mean, Tumlinson gets translated to tumbleweed, to tombstone. So I understand where you're coming from, man. So Archie asks, he likes the doc to MP3 idea. What program do you use for the Scottish accent?
It's actually two. The software that creates the MP3 is called Balabolka, Balabolka. I think it's a Russian name. So Balabolka will read out a document for you or create an MP3. Then the voice I bought basically gets installed into Windows, which is what I'm using. And then within this Balabolka program, I can choose what voice I want to use, such as one of the default Windows American ones or whatever. So I can then choose it. I think it's a type of voice file called SAPI, S-A-P-I, which is an industry standard. So as long as you buy one of those, you can plug it into your operating system and then use it in any of the software packages that can read out a voice. I can't remember offhand which company I bought it from, but they had about 20 American voices and Canadian, Irish, Scottish, 10 different English voices. So it's something that maybe if there's a chance later, I can share it on social media so that I can pass on the information of where I actually got it from. I got it on a sale. The company had sort of pay only a third and you get the voice. It's one of the best investments I've made in a piece of software. Probably cost me about £20. And, it's become a vital part of my editing process. But Balabolka is free, and the voices aren't very expensive either.
Okay, that's great advice. Here's another question coming in from YouTube. Allison asks, are there any emerging genre trends in publishing or what's currently popular?
Oh, that's a difficult one for me to answer because I'm interested in trends that might affect me. So I do follow things such as when people are doing multimedia books. For example, I've just watched a TV series called Into the Night, which is a Belgian series. And I was studying it very much as a way of creating plot points that are riveting because it's a really well done TV series. I spotted that it was based on a novel by a Polish author. It's his first novel. And I started to look into it. And his novel is electronic only, multi-layered text, where it's got hypertext links, it's got video, it's got sound built into it. It's got a whole layer, which is almost a thesaurus and an index underneath it, explaining technical terms to do with his world. I think that's the kind of thing. It's difficult to market, but it's certainly one of the trends where people can use technology to create something that would never have been an option, so many years ago. Obviously, the trend that has affected me is the ease now with which you can professionally publish independently. Thanks to distributors like Draft Digital, excellent. Thanks to things like that, thanks to the availability of software, editing software, writing software, graphics creation software, the fact you've got this whole industry that has sprung up to support authors. So if you can't do something yourself, such as interior book design or cover design or anything like that, or even social media, there are people that will step in and you can pay them to do it, to create these beautiful covers, to act as a personal assistant, to do the interior formatting for you. And I think that's a huge trend in terms of enabling authors, which again, 10, 15 years ago, there wasn't that infrastructure to support them. And now it's much better at giving authors the option as to whether they want to be trade published or traditionally published, whether they want to be independently published, whether they want to be hybrid and go in between the two. And I'm all for empowering the authors, whichever route they take, they choose the route that's going to work for them. The point is authors now have options which they didn't have 10, 15 years ago. So that might not be, anything to do with the trends of what's popular at the moment in terms of celebrity cookbooks this year or celebrity biographies or something like that I would never read, or dystopian overtaking space opera. But certainly it's a trend in terms of technology that is a fantastic thing for enabling people.
Yeah. I think cookbooks are going to be huge this year. Actually, everybody's home baking bread.
I'm going to release a cookbook. Yeah, the Scottish
I'll do a
baked bean
Dan
cookbook.
Crowther archaeological thriller cookbook. So Chris from YouTube is asking, have you noticed an increase in readers accepting novella-length books and short stories over time, i.e. since you started?
I think so. That is true, that they go in phases. You often hear, especially in trade publishing, that, for example, short stories are no good at all. Unless you're a huge name, or people don't want to read them, they want to read novels. I'm not always convinced that's true. There is bound to be a seed of truth in it. But, for example, I love short stories. I've read, when I was a kid growing up, I read all Stephen King's books. My favorite one was Night Shift. That was the thing that made me fall in love with the genre. And it's a short story collection. In terms of novellas, there's pros and cons, because with the great thing with novellas is that when everything was printed in paper format, novellas weren't always worth publishing. They're so thin, there's cost to get them out there. You couldn't make enough money from them. But nowadays, for example, I think probably 97% of my book sales are ebooks. You can easily publish and release a novella quickly. And I think there is an audience of people who, in some cases, they just want a story that they can consume on a journey to work or back. And novellas fit into that because they're longer than a short story, giving you the chance for character development. But at the same time, they're not going to, I'm reading David Copperfield by Charles Dickens at the moment. It's going to be a major thing that will take me months. A novella wouldn't be that kind of commitment. You can get through it quickly and have, and you can have the excitement of a new story and an interesting arc and characters, but you could read 4 of them in the time that, maybe it's the tapas of fiction. You can have 4 of them in the time it would take to have one other. And I think what we're also seeing is series are becoming a big thing, even in trade publishing, whether it's the Hunger Games or Harry Potter, they always would like another book following on from a successful book. And novellas are a great way of being able to expand a series and provide more content to a rabid fan base that want those books in less of a time commitment. So with one of my science fiction series, the 2 books so far, of each one's got a bit bigger. The next one's got to be huge. It's a big time commitment to write it. So in the meantime, I've been releasing some what's called Lost Tales of Solace, basically novellas of up to 20,000 words, where I can write them fairly quickly. I can edit them a lot more quickly. My editors can get them back to me. I can release them on a more frequent sort of schedule. It keeps the fans happy. And, I probably make almost the same money from those as I do from the main books. Yeah. And people, they get into something, they buy one, they want to buy all of them. And if there's novellas available, they'll buy those. So everybody wins.
They're a nice soft launch for the rest of the series. Like readers can come in on something shorter. They don't have to invest as much financially or in terms of trust. Yeah. And if they like it, they go pick up the other books. So
exactly.
I'm a big fan. So we got another question coming in from YouTube. How do you find and recruit your beta readers? What criteria do you use?
Well, for me, it developed slowly. They basically came out of being super fans. It's a term that I'd heard, and I didn't have any super fans back when I first heard it. I thought, wouldn't it be nice to have super fans? But these are the fans who don't just buy your books and review your books. They're the ones that perhaps have contacted you and said how much they loved it and this was their favorite bit and are you writing another one, that kind of thing. They're invested to the point that they go out there and they do some marketing work for you. They tell people about your work. So those are the kind of people where a small subset of those, you can almost tell when you read reviews, I think. There's a review I read the other day by somebody of my science fiction books, and it was so perceptive that they'd seen through to something that I was trying to do, which I hadn't vocalized to other people. And I immediately thought, this person would make a great beta reader. They're a fan of the work, but they also understand how stories work. They see not just the entertainment level, but they see through to structure and character arcs and so on. And what I found over the years is that as I find those people, I might interact with them a bit. And what then happens is that if it carries on and, you know, they become a friend, they're the kind of people that you ask them, would you be interested in joining my sort of insider team, my beta group? They're not strangers that you know nothing about. You've already built up a relationship with them. You've got some level of trust that their opinions are valid. And at the same time, they want to be more involved. They would like to be the first person to read this new story. They would like to perhaps have some input into where it goes. So with my last book, it was very much one that I wanted to write. But one of my super fans, my beta readers, a Canadian guy who I get on very well with, and we sometimes chat in the morning before I start work, how are you doing, and so on. He had an idea for one of my books. He loves chess and military history, and he was suggesting ways that he thought this character might work with a game of chess. And I ran with that. He was spot on. It really fitted that character. And it eventually became the structure for the whole book, an idea of a game of chess interleaved amongst all the other plot elements. And that came from a beta reader. And he came from being a super fan, and that came from, you know, people reading and reviewing the books. So I don't really have tips apart from, if people like your stuff, be very nice to them. Very, very nice.
Right. Yeah, those
be nice to everybody anyway.
You should be nice to everybody. Yeah, just by default. But yeah, those readers who reach out to me and say, hey, look, I found this list of errors, and I just wanted you to know so you can make the book even better.
That's great.
I give them an invite to the beta team. So we are at the end of the program, but you've been amazing, man. I appreciate you stopping in and chatting with us.
Thank you very much. It's been great.
So everybody, make sure you go on over to karldrinkwater.uk for as long as that extension exists, apparently. That domain name. That's Karl with a K, by the way, if you're listening on the podcast. And if you are not already, go ahead and subscribe to us on YouTube. If you go to youtube.com/draftdigital, you can also go to facebook.com/draftdigital, either one of those, and make sure you're subscribing to us so you can be alerted whenever we get more of these little broadcasts going. And you can tune in at d2dlive.com and see a little countdown every week or every couple of days, really, for when the next live broadcast is going. And of course, we would be remiss if we didn't have like 100 domain names to give you. But selfpublishinginsiders.com is a brand new domain that we're running that will lead you to this show, and you can watch it, listen to it, and read it all online. So make sure you're checking that out. Karl, thanks for sitting through all that with me, man.
Thank you very much, Kevin.
I appreciate you being on. And everybody else, thank you. And tune in for the next D2D. Well, now we call it Self-Publishing Insiders. And we'll see you all next time.
Yep. Thank you.